My shameless, entitled sisters insisted that I let them rent out my country house for profit when I refused. This story was already posted on my channel a few months back, but there have been some recent updates that might catch your interest. I'll put the timestamp in the description if you want to skip the older parts. My entitled sisters insisted that I should rent out my vacation home so they could make money from it. When I said no, their husbands broke in, and now they're facing charges. This all went down today. My parents decided to throw a barbecue, which seems to be a classic older folks activity. I didn't want to go because, honestly, I can't stand my two sisters, their husbands, or their kids. My wife and I don't have kids ourselves. My mom kept pushing my wife to attend, so, long story short, we went. When we got there, about 20 people were already gathered. My sisters and their husbands were already pretty buzzed. Well, drunk, really. My mom was busy trying to keep the nieces and nephews, aged between 7 and 11, somewhat under control. My dad, on the other hand, had wisely retreated to the hot tub area with a cooler full of beers. My wife and I mingled a bit, chatted with random people, had some food, and enjoyed a frozen margarita. Meanwhile, my sisters and brothers-in-law took turns criticizing us for being late, not being in swimsuits, and apparently ruining the party vibe. It was just another typical suburban summer gathering. About 45 minutes in, two of the kids ran at one of the neighbors by the pool and pushed her. She was standing by the pool steps, stumbled in, but didn't fully fall, so she only got partially wet. She was obviously upset, but didn't make a scene. She just grabbed her towel, dried off, and left. My sisters and brothers-in-law found it hilarious. A bit later, I noticed three of the kids running straight at me from the corner of my eye. It was clear I was their next target. It's not that hard to dodge young kids, so I simply jumped out of the way at the last moment. All three of them went full speed into the pool. Most of the guests, including my wife and me, started laughing, but my sisters, who were pretty wasted, freaked out. Apparently, two of the kids couldn't swim, even though they were in swimsuits. Since I wasn't dressed for swimming, I stayed back and let others help fish the kids out. The kids started bawling like they'd lost a limb, and then all hell broke loose. The four drunk parents started yelling at everyone, especially me, for almost letting their kids drown, and because the kids had been recording the prank on their parents' iPhones, which were now at the bottom of the pool. One of my brothers-in-law tried to retrieve the phones, but his size and drunkenness made it impossible. No one else offered to help, probably because my sisters were still yelling at everyone. I told my sisters that it was their responsibility to watch their kids, and that if anything had happened, it would have been on them, not me. There were some pretty harsh words exchanged. My wife and I decided to leave after the other brother-in-law fell over and face-planted while yelling at us. Now they're saying I should have let their kids push me into the pool and ruin my phone just to let them have fun. Yeah, right. A side note from me. I get that they're just kids, and we're just trying to have fun. The real issue here is how their parents think this kind of behavior is okay. In hindsight, I wish we hadn't gone. It was nice to see my folks and their neighbors, but I really don't like my sisters or their husbands. They don't bother hiding their envy of us, and being around them is just exhausting. As for why I don't care much for some of my family, it's a classic oil and water situation. I've never been close to my sisters. They're 8 and 10 years older than me. I don't have much in common with their husbands either. They're decent guys, but I just don't care about the things they find important, and the feeling is mutual. I know the four of them are somewhat envious of our lifestyle. Both my sisters are stay-at-home moms, and while their husbands earn good money, one makes one of my brothers-in-law earns noticeably more than I do, but both my wife and I have solid professional careers. We're child-free and much more responsible with our finances. As a result, we have a lot more investments and don't have to deal with cars full of kid clutter. We also manage to take nice vacations once or twice a year. This definitely grates on both of my sisters, and by extension, their husbands, so we often deal with petty behavior from them. Overall, neither my wife nor I enjoy their company, which is why I wanted to skip the get-together. It just isn't worth the trouble for me, but my wife is a positive person and usually enjoys seeing them. Hopefully, next time she won't feel pressured into going. That's probably the one good thing that will come out of this. My wife is generally much more tolerant and forgiving towards my siblings than I am, but based on what she said on the way home, I think she's finally had enough. As for my dad, he's pretty awesome. He's super chill, loves being around people, and used to be in sales. He enjoys seeing others have a good time, and is definitely living his best life as a retiree. He and a couple of other guys just sat back and watched the chaos unfold. My mom is great too, but the situation with the kids upset her. Speaking of the kids, they're fine. By the time we left, they were inside watching TV. I think they're around 7, 9, 10, 10, and 11. It was the middle three who tried to pull their stunt on me, and I'm guessing the 11-year-old egged them on. She's usually the ringleader. You might have noticed the way I phrased the part about my parents hosting a barbecue was a bit off. I had to shorten the post to fit the character limit. My folks are really social and love hosting people. They have the perfect house for entertaining and are always looking for a reason to gather everyone together. They had originally wanted everyone over for the 4th of July, but one of my sisters and her family were on vacation. So this was a belated 4th of July party, complete with flags, red, white, and blue decorations, a barbecue, a margarita machine, and even promised sparklers for the kids. My nieces and nephews were the only kids there since all the neighbors are older, like my parents. As for the verdict, it looks like most people think I'm not the a-hole here. In an update posted on August 17, 2023, nearly a month later, I mentioned that my folks had told me all my nieces and nephews are actually good swimmers and use the pool all the time. The 7-year-old is still learning, but he loves the water. My sister had just claimed they couldn't swim to make me look bad. To be fair, none of the kids are allowed in the deep end, which is where they ended up after trying to push me. It was the two 10-year-olds and the 9-year-old who made the attempt. After we left, the party ended on a sour note. My drunk brother-in-law, the one who face-planted while yelling at me, had to go to urgent care for stitches. He was too drunk to drive, so my dad had to take him, and he wasn't happy about it. Later that evening, one of my sisters started a group text and said some really nasty things. Their husbands joined in, so my wife and I blocked all 4 of them. My mom called me, clearly upset about what was said, as she and my dad were also in the chat. I don't blame her for being distressed. Because of the texts, my parents insisted my sisters and their husbands come over the next day, Sunday, without their kids, to set some ground rules. My mom's words, not mine. The result was a rather forced apology from my siblings via my mom's phone. I'm glad my wife was with me when they called, as her hard stares kept me from saying what I really wanted to. I just thanked them and said there was no need to discuss it further. Thinking things were settled, I unblocked them. But then, that evening, I got a text from one of my brothers-in-law asking when I'd be paying for the phones, which were apparently worth a lot of money. WTF? I replied, never, took a screenshot of his text, and sent it to my folks with a note saying, we were done with this nonsense. I told them we're going no contact with my sisters and their spouses, and that we won't attend any more holidays or get-togethers if they're invited. Then I blocked them all again. After that, things really hit the fan. My dad called them and gave them a piece of his mind. He told them that their grandkids weren't welcome at his place anymore, which rattled them since my mom regularly babysits for free. He also banned them from using the vacation house and informed them that my wife and I actually own it, not he and mom. This completely freaked them out because both of my sister's families use the place often, even letting their friends stay there for weekend getaways. This reaction from my parents was very out of character, but they'd clearly had enough. For context, we never wanted my sisters to know we owned the place. We bought it for my folks because they'd always wanted a spot in the mountains. Keeping the ownership quiet was just a way to avoid drama with my siblings. A couple of days later, my sisters and their husbands showed up at our place unannounced to apologize in person. We were out to dinner, so they left a note. One of my sisters also called me at work. I sent her to voicemail. We've decided that going no contact is the best thing for the foreseeable future and haven't interacted with them for the last 3+ weeks. Personally, I'm done. They can go pound sand. As for how life has been since, I have to say it's been less than a month, but blocking them has noticeably improved our peace of mind. I hadn't realized how much ongoing low-level drama they brought into our lives. They're not toxic people. They're not bad, but they're just tiresome and petty. And personally, I don't care about them using the weekend place. Technically, it's ours, but we bought it from my folks, and they control it. We pay all the operating costs and taxes. One good thing about this whole blow-up, one positive outcome of all this, is that we've now figured out what to do with the property when my parents get older. I had originally planned to manage it, handling the upkeep, scheduling, and so on. But now we've decided to just sell it. If we ever want to visit the mountains, we'll simply rent an Airbnb. My parents aren't naive. They're pretty easygoing, adopting a live and let live attitude. I imagine they'll relax on this whole issue eventually, but that's their call. Even so, we won't be attending any family events for the foreseeable future. What's probably gnawing at my sisters is the fear that I might prevent them from using the cabin. I won't do that. That's up to mom and dad until they get older. One of my sisters had this fantasy of building a compound of houses on the property, which I've known about and ignored for a while. Normally, the lots up there only have one buildable area, but this piece of land is much larger because it's at the end of a road. It could potentially accommodate at least 3 houses with great views. I don't believe my sister's apologies were genuine. They just want something from me. I have no intention of interacting with them anytime soon. As for the vacation home, it's really my parents' decision to make. Yes, technically I own it and cover all the expenses, but I bought it for them and handed over the day-to-day control. They're good people and always wanted a family retreat, but they couldn't have afforded it themselves. I was able to buy it for them because I've been fortunate financially, saving and investing wisely. Plus, I received a massive bonus the year I sold my house and moved in with my now wife. I don't mind if my parents let my siblings use the house, but I do take a certain satisfaction in my sister's discomfort upon discovering that I could afford to buy the place and let our parents use it without ever telling them. Last week, my dad changed the lock code, so now only he, mom, my wife, and I have it. Regarding my mom babysitting the kids, she told me that once a week, she and sometimes my dad go over to each sister's house and spend the day with the kids. Once school starts, she plans to pick each set up from school once a week on different days and spend the evening with them. She says having all 5 together stresses her out, but they're manageable individually. Both my parents have mentioned that they don't plan on inviting my sisters and their families back to their place anytime soon and are enjoying the peace and quiet. I suspect they were already tired of the old family dynamic and used the pool party fiasco as an opportunity to change the relationships. On a lighter note, the reason my post got removed from the AmITheA subreddit was apparently due to some rule about property damage counting as violence. I guess the ruined phones were the issue, which seems ridiculous. Update as of August 26, 2023. 9 days after the last update. Things have gotten even crazier over the past few days. I thought the situation had already peaked, but that was nothing compared to this week. To provide some financial context, my parents haven't been great at saving money. I've been doing their taxes for years, so I know pretty much everything about their financial situation. Their house is paid off, they have minimal debt, but they didn't save much for retirement. Both of them receive Social Security. My dad has a decent pension, and they have some savings, but there's no hidden fortune. I bought their current car for them as a retirement gift so they could have something nice to drive. It was the first car in probably 20 years that they didn't lease. My sisters seem to think our parents are wealthy and assume they'll inherit everything since I don't need more money. Consequently, they haven't cared much about saving. It turns out my oldest sister and her husband, who have 3 kids, have been living beyond their means and are in financial trouble. They've maxed out their credit cards and are behind on their car leases, with one car on the verge of being repossessed. He used to boast about making a certain amount of money, but it turns out he earns about half of that. My sister confessed all this to my mom on Tuesday because they needed a loan. And here's the kicker. For the last 3 years, instead of staying at the vacation house regularly, she's been renting it out once a month or so and pocketing the cash. We're talking over $2,000 for a weekend and at least $4,000 for a week. Now that she's been cut off from using the place, she's already had to cancel one booking and is worried they'll lose everything. My parents aren't in a position to give them a loan. My other sister knew about the rental scheme, but of course, never said anything. I suspect she might have done the same because I once went up there to drop off an ATV I had worked on and found a family there who said they were staying. There was a time when I found out a family was staying at the vacation house, claiming they were there with my sister and her family, who had supposedly gone into town for something. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking she might have lent the place to some friends. But I've always had my suspicions. I learned all of this from my parents, who are pretty stressed out about the situation. My mom more than my dad. He's mostly just pissed off. I know Dad feels betrayed, and likely embarrassed that he's not in a position to help his daughter out financially. He made it clear that as long as he's in charge, my sisters won't be using the vacation home anytime soon. My parents filled me in on the situation because they anticipated my sisters would soon come after me, and they were right. On Thursday, my sisters showed up at our place again, this time without their husbands, and waited outside until I got home. I had a choice: argue with them in public, let them cause a scene if I went in without them, or let them in. So, I let them in. The older sister launched into a story, with the younger one backing her up, about why they needed immediate access to the mountain house again. They also accused me of being a terrible brother and demanded that I step up and pay for their kids' college tuition, because that's what family does. I let them tell their tale, then confronted them with what my parents had shared. Things went downhill from there. Denials, crying, cursing, yelling, you name it. My ears were still ringing 2 days later. I won't lie, I said some harsh things to them, but nothing that wasn't true. They finally left after about an hour. Afterward, I took a shower and laid down. When I got up, my wife was home, and the first thing she told me was that she'd had to block more numbers because my sisters were calling from new ones, blowing up our phones. My folks messaged me yesterday, asking me to call. I'm sure my sisters told them some twisted version of what happened, but I'm not ready to rehash it all just yet. Normally, I'm a pretty energetic person, but this drama has worn me out. I only had enough energy today to drive up to the vacation house and padlock the entrance gate. I'm the only one with the key, so that should keep my siblings from accessing the place. They'd probably collapse trying to walk the 400 yards uphill to get to the house. Update 3, posted on September 12, 2023, 2.5 weeks since the last update. My extended family situation continues to be a mess, and I thought it might be time for another update given what's happened over the past couple of weeks. After my sisters came to our place, my parents informed me that they were done managing the vacation home. It sounded like my sisters had been pressuring them to let them use the place again. My folks handed the responsibility for the property over to me, essentially saying it was now my problem. Up until then, they had managed who could use it and taken care of routine maintenance, like replacing worn-out items. While I don't blame them for stepping away, I'm disappointed because the place was supposed to be something they could enjoy and relax in, and they used it regularly. I've never minded that they let my sisters and their families use it, as I always saw it as my parents' call, even though I technically own it. But now my folks won't have access without involving me, and that changes the whole dynamic of the place. I've taken several steps to secure the property. As I mentioned, I locked the gate with a heavy-duty chain and the best lock I could find. I also reset all the door keypads and created new codes. Yesterday, I had security cameras installed, which is actually pretty cool because the installer convinced me to put one high-resolution camera that overlooks the valley. The whole system cost more than I expected, but the peace of mind is worth it. The installer also put up signs on the property stating that it was monitored by video surveillance. I also installed a heavy-duty lockout on the water shutoff valve. I hope to hell I don't lose the keys for it, because removing it would be a real hassle. So far, I've only told my wife about the water being shut off, and we're the only ones with the keys. Last week, I received separate calls at my office from both brothers-in-law, trying to convince me to let them use the house as they always have. The older one had gone up with some friends for a guy's hangout, but couldn't get in because of the gate lock. He was clearly pissed and embarrassed about being locked out. I'm sure he would have broken the lock if he could have. During the call, he kept shifting between being pushy and playing the victim. At one point, he even threatened to rip the gate out of the ground. He also admitted that they'd been renting the place out to friends for extra cash, saying I was ruining their business and that I should refund their guest money. Yeah, right. I should have recorded the conversation, but I don't know how to do that from an office phone. The other brother-in-law sounded like he was calling because my sister made him. He didn't put up much of a fight when I told him not to plan on ever using the place again. With all this drama, I'm seriously considering selling the vacation home. My wife and I don't use it enough to justify keeping it, and it's not like there will be any family get-togethers there anytime soon. I mentioned the idea of selling to my folks, and their response was pretty much, whatever. If I sold it, I'd more than double my money. The property includes 3 lots with stunning views and is at the end of a private road. But I'll probably wait a bit before making any decisions. Doing anything now would be an emotional decision. My sisters and I aren't on speaking terms, and I have no plans to initiate contact. I'm not sure what the current status is between them and my parents, and I'm not eager to find out. On a brighter note, we spent an evening with my folks last week at a new restaurant, which was nice. Nobody brought up any of this drama. My mom did update us on the nieces and nephews. She's been spending time with them at their homes. Sorry this update isn't filled with laughs or owns. Sometimes that's just life. Update post for October 16th, 2023, 1 month later. A couple of people have asked for an update, so here it is. I hired a local guy to manage and keep an eye on the vacation home. He lives nearby, takes care of his folks, and manages several properties. Some are vacation rentals, and others are weekend places like ours. He has access to my camera feeds and does a physical check on the property every week or two. It seems like he might have the best job in the mountains. He gets paid to drive around with his dog, walk around the properties, and hang out on people's decks whenever he feels like it. He also has a camera feed from a house near the start of the private road that takes still shots whenever a vehicle passes by. For $450 per month, plus hourly rates for basic maintenance and repairs, it's worth the peace of mind. He's friends with all the local sheriff's deputies, too. He even sends photos from his walks to everyone once or twice a week. I have to give a shout-out to my parents. I learned tonight at dinner that my sisters have been pressuring them to insist I open up the vacation house for everyone for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving in the mountains had become quite the family tradition, though not for my wife and me. We've only gone once in the past several years. My dad refused to hassle me about it because he knew I'd say no. Instead, they came up with a great plan. They announced they were organizing the Thanksgiving gathering and would rent an Airbnb in the mountains if everyone split the cost up front. If not, they'd host Thanksgiving at their place, or one of the sisters could host it. This caused a spat between the sisters because the middle sister was all for the Airbnb idea, but the oldest one couldn't afford it. The deadline to commit to the Airbnb has passed, so it looks like Thanksgiving will be at my parents' place regardless. We won't be attending. My parents have asked that we not sell the vacation home for now. They still want to use it occasionally, but not until my sisters come to terms with the new normal. Ideally, they'd like it if everyone could gather there again someday, but that's just not going to happen. I'd rather sell it and move on, but I can live with keeping it if my parents do use it occasionally. Besides, the property will only increase in value over time. My wife and I have stayed no contact with my sisters and their husbands. Both sisters have called from new numbers, thanks Google Voice, and left messages insisting I meet with them to work out how everyone can use the family vacation home for our parents' sake. They've called my wife, too. I'm glad I've gotten into the habit of not answering calls from unrecognized numbers. Honestly, I can't tell if they're delusional or think they can bully me into giving them access again. Either way, I don't care. My parents told me that the oldest sister and her husband are getting out of their SUV and big truck leases and are selling their jet skis and other stuff they don't need. This will be a tough adjustment for her. She loves to show off, and driving something older, smaller, and cheaper won't be easy for her. My brother-in-law's identity is tied to his truck, to the point that he even has a small tattoo of the truck company's logo. Frankly, that's just one of the many reasons why he and I never hung out. Several people have suggested I turn the vacation home into an Airbnb, but I don't plan to do that, at least not anytime soon. I know it would generate income, but it would also cause a lot of drama within the family and stress my parents out. They don't need that, and neither do I. Plus, it would be a hassle to remove my parents' personal belongings from the place. Those items have no other place to go, and there would inevitably be wear and tear on the house. It's just not worth it to me. Update post 5 for November 27th, 2023, 1.5 months later. I wrote most of this yesterday, but decided to wait until I wasn't so worked up. Waiting didn't help. I'm still wound up, so apologies if this rambles. So much has happened, and it's hard to write coherently. Things have really gone to hell. I never imagined anything like this would happen. The short version is that my brothers-in-law broke into my vacation home and got arrested. They've been charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and communicating threats, all Class 1 misdemeanors. I've refused to drop the charges. I might consider it if they fully compensate me for the damage they caused. As of Saturday evening, they were still in jail, though I assume they're out by now. Things had settled down, or so I thought. I hadn't seen or heard from my sisters in over 6 weeks. My parents went up to the house for a week and had a great time. David, the property manager I hired, has been fantastic. He's done a few repairs I asked for and has a list of more to do. He usually sends photos of wildlife or sunsets to his clients every week, which almost makes me want to visit. On Friday after Thanksgiving, my brothers-in-law went to the vacation home. They used an angle grinder to cut through the chain on the driveway gate, damaging the gate in the process. They tried to get in through the front door, ruining the lock set and badly gouging the door. They eventually got in through the utility room door and then forced open a locked internal door. They even broke into the barn, though I'm not sure why. When they exited through the front door, they were met by sheriff's deputies and David. David gets notifications from the camera system whenever there's activity. He saw what was happening and called the sheriff's department. According to David, the brothers-in-law tried to talk their way out of it, but the deputies weren't buying it. Breaking into an empty house is a serious offense up there, typically associated with meth heads looking to ransack the place and pawn everything. When they were arrested, the brothers-in-law lost it, making threats about beating me up. Definitely not smart to do in front of cops. David in the sheriff's office tried calling my wife and me to see what we wanted to do, but we were spending the day with her parents and had left our phones in the car to fully enjoy the day. So, they booked the brothers-in-law on all charges, which is exactly what I would have asked them to do. The brothers-in-law called their wives from jail, who of course freaked out. They called my parents, tried to call me, they're blocked, and tried to find a lawyer to arrange bail. Not an easy task, given it's a rural area and was a holiday weekend. The older sister has no cash and maxed out credit cards, so if they made bail, the middle sister would have had to cover it for both husbands. As of Saturday afternoon, they were still in jail. We didn't check our phones until late Friday on the way home from the in-laws. We had a ton of missed calls and messages from my mom, dad, David, and the sheriff's department. Talk about ruining a great day. I was in such a good mood until I looked at my phone. My wife read through the texts and listened to the messages, reading them out to me. By the time we got home, I had a pretty good idea of what had gone down. I tried to stay calm, but it didn't work. I was furious. I called David and got the full rundown on what happened and the extent of the damage, which only made me angrier. I ended Friday by calling the sheriff's department to confirm that there was no misunderstanding. The brothers-in-law had absolutely no right to be on my property, and I wanted to press charges. I didn't call my parents back and barely slept. I waited until Saturday afternoon to call them. They were both pretty shaken, especially my mom. My sisters had pressured them into telling me to say it was all a mistake and that I wanted the charges dropped. I flat out refused and told them I wouldn't even consider it until I'd spoken with an attorney and been fully compensated for all the damage. My mom was in tears by the end of the call, which of course made me feel awful. My dad suggested it might be time for a complete fresh start, but agreed that the brothers-in-law needed to pay for the damage. I haven't gone up to the property yet. There's nothing I can do at this point, and I know I'll probably lose it when I see the damage in person. The photos are bad enough. I'm hoping to go up tomorrow or Wednesday, but my job isn't one I can just leave for non-emergencies. I've left messages with 2 attorney friends asking them to recommend lawyers to go after my sisters and brothers-in-law. I don't know exactly what I can do, but I'm hoping to get restraining orders. I have all the texts they've sent me, which might help. I'm strongly considering suing them for the money they made renting the place out. I don't care about the cash. It's more about making them as miserable as possible. The gloves are definitely off now. A couple of side notes. 1. The brothers-in-law had no idea I'd hired someone to keep an eye on the place. My brothers-in-law had no idea there were now cameras on the property or that I'd hired someone to keep an eye on things. My parents were aware but hadn't told them, knowing it would only create more drama. There are signs on the property indicating it's being monitored with cameras, along with no trespassing signs. As for my wife, she's completely fed up with the situation, and I don't blame her. She's been incredibly patient, but she's reached her limit and made it clear to me. She said it's up to me how to handle this, but she believes they all need a harsh lesson. As for the consequences, the older brother-in-law likely won't face any repercussions at his job, but the middle brother-in-law has a security clearance, so this could impact him. I hope this motivates him to pay for the damages immediately. David, the caretaker, has an interesting background. I knew he was friends with some of the deputies, assuming it was because they were all locals. Turns out, I was wrong. David was a police officer in a big city and was shot on duty. After that, he decided to leave the force and move to where his parents had retired. He has some PTSD from the incident, and his dog is a certified service animal that usually accompanies him. It's no surprise that law enforcement folks stick together, which is how he became friends with the deputies. I have no desire to see or speak to these people for the rest of my life, even though part of me wants to make their lives as miserable as possible. A lot of people have suggested that I should have been tougher from the start, but I avoided it to keep my parents from getting stressed. Well, they're stressed now. My wife has pretty much opted out of any further involvement. She doesn't want to hear about it for a while, and has made it clear this is my responsibility. She might listen if I need to vent, but I doubt she'll get involved any further. As for why they broke in, my guess is they plan to use the house for family getaways or to rent it out again. According to David, the property manager, it's deer season through the end of the year, and the brothers-in-law have used the place as a base camp for big group hunting trips before. The house can accommodate quite a few people, so one event with friends could net them thousands of dollars. That might explain why they broke into the barn as well. I bought a 6-seater utility vehicle a few years back, and they probably wanted to use that. I don't think they intended to trash the place. It means too much to my dad, and they both like him a lot. Update post 6 for December 2nd, 2023. 5 days later, Saturday. I didn't expect to be posting another update so soon, but a lot has happened in the past 2 days. In short, it feels like a corner has been turned in this whole mess. On Thursday afternoon, I received a courier-delivered envelope at my office. Inside was a signed letter from both my brothers-in-law and a cashier's check for $5,000. The letter contained what I must admit was a very sincere apology. Among other things, they acknowledged breaking in, admitted it was wrong, and said the $5,000 was for the damages. They also offered to pay more if the repairs cost more than that, and promised to stay away from the vacation home unless my wife and I specifically invited them. They asked me to do what I could to get the charges dropped as soon as possible, as both of them could lose their jobs. They also said they'd agree to a restraining order, or whatever else it took to resolve the situation. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. It was a complete 180 from their previous behavior. I had already scheduled an appointment with an attorney to discuss suing my brothers-in-law for the damages and seeking a restraining order. I called him to let him know what I'd received, and he agreed to meet with me that same day instead of next week. He advised me not to deposit the check. We met for about 2 hours, and he recommended that my wife and I pursue a settlement and mutual release agreement with all 4 of them, my sisters and their husbands. He explained that if we went ahead with a lawsuit, we'd almost certainly win, but it could take 2 years or more, involve significant upfront legal fees, and we might never see any money. He also mentioned that we could keep the $5,000 even if we didn't let them off the hook. He's drafting the agreement, which should be ready by Monday. The agreement will include what's essentially the civil equivalent of a restraining order. I had already asked David, the property manager, to work up a bid for the repairs. After the meeting, I called him and asked for an accurate estimate as soon as possible. On Friday, he estimated that the repairs would cost around $4,000, most of which would go towards fixing the front door. That same day, my attorney contacted both brothers-in-law, explained our proposal, and advised them to get their own lawyers. They both agreed to it. The middle brother-in-law mentioned they could afford either to pay for the damages or hire a lawyer, but not both. They figured a lawyer wouldn't make much difference, since they had no real defense for their actions. His biggest concern was getting the charges dropped. From what I can gather, they're willing to do anything and sign anything to make this all go away. My attorney also contacted the DA's office on Friday to discuss dismissing the charges. He got the name of the prosecutor and left a message but hasn't spoken to them yet. He thinks there's a good chance the charges will be dismissed since the brothers-in-law are paying up and have no prior offenses, but he's not a criminal lawyer. He also said I should be prepared to. My attorney advised me to meet with the prosecutor in person on Monday or Tuesday to confirm that I want everything dismissed. He also recommended that I maintain no contact with my sisters and brothers-in-law, especially for the next 6 months, and that it will be crucial to adhere to the terms of the agreement for any future interactions with them. I suspect the brothers-in-law have realized what's at stake: legal fees, fines, and the potential, albeit unlikely possibility of jail time for up to 120 days. Additionally, one of them has a security clearance for his job, which could be jeopardized. This appears to be their last-ditch effort to salvage their normal lives. While this isn't the perfect resolution, it will at least allow me to move past the legal and financial mess I've been entangled in for the past few months. I doubt I'll ever have a civil relationship with any of them again, and that's fine. What I want most now is to close this chapter, move on with my life, and never have to speak to them again. I'm utterly exhausted by all of this, and my wife feels the same way. On a somewhat personal note, receiving the written apology was surprisingly significant for me. I never expected it, but apparently it matters a lot. The money itself doesn't seem particularly important right now, though I'll definitely accept it. I'm fairly certain the middle sister and her husband came up with the money, as the cashier's check is from the credit union of the company he works for. Once everything is signed, I'll probably make one more update, likely as an edit to this post. Apologies if I seem overly detailed, but writing these posts has helped me clear my head, and the feedback has been invaluable. I truly appreciate everyone's comments, insights, and support, and I sincerely hope none of you ever have to go through this kind of nonsense. Relevant comment. To be honest, when I finally got home Thursday night, I cried from relief at the thought that this might all be over. I'm not going to discuss the settlement with my parents until it's signed by everyone. My sisters and their husbands can do so if they want, but I want. It's between me and them. Final update, December 7th, 2023, 5 days later. On Tuesday morning, I met with my attorney, reviewed the agreement, made a couple of minor changes, and he sent it to my sisters and brothers-in-law. The agreement included a requirement for them to cover my attorney's fee of about $3,000. They weren't happy about that and tried to negotiate it out, but my attorney was firm. Either they accept the terms as is, or we proceed with suing them for the rental income, wear and tear from renting the place, repair costs from the break-in, emotional distress, lost income from dealing with this, attorney fees, and anything else we could pursue. He also informed them that I would strongly advocate for full prosecution of all charges. In the end, they agreed and signed. I wasn't present, but I'm told it was a tense environment. The middle brother-in-law seemed to take charge, and at one point told my sisters to shut the hell up, or had walk away from the whole thing, making his own deal with us and leaving them to fend for themselves. They provided another cashier's check for $2,500, claiming it was all they could afford. It's close enough, so we're accepting it as the final payment. My attorney also mentioned that everyone was very cold and curt toward one another, but they managed to keep it together long enough to sign and left without causing too much of a scene. Yesterday, I drove up to the vacation house to assess the damage and meet with the DA's office. Seeing the damage in person made my blood boil. It was so senseless. I was so angry that I was ready to eat the repair costs just to make their lives as difficult as possible. I tried walking it off but failed miserably. I ended up calling a good friend who stayed on the phone with me for over an hour, letting me vent. He eventually helped me refocus on the bigger picture of putting this behind me and moving on with my life. Honestly, I'm still not sure that's what I want to do, but I calmed down enough to eat something and felt better after lunch. In the afternoon, I went to the DA's office. I hadn't made an appointment and had to wait a while, but I finally met with the assistant DA handling the case. The short version is that, since I don't want to prosecute, and the brothers-in-law have already paid for the damages, they are willing to drop all charges except for trespassing, which in this case will be a Class 2 misdemeanor. The brothers-in-law will have to plead guilty and pay whatever fine the judge sets. I was also informed that if they contest the trespassing charge or cause any trouble up there in the future, it would not end well for them. It helped that they didn't resist arrest. Otherwise, none of the charges would have been dropped. I also stopped by the sheriff's office to thank them for their quick response and everything they did. I wanted to thank the deputies personally, but I only spoke to the dispatch person. I also tried to meet up with David, the property manager, but couldn't get a hold of him. A couple of notes. The agreement includes a no-contact clause. Essentially, if any of them show up where my wife or I are, or vice versa, whoever arrived last has to leave immediately. No contact is allowed except through attorneys or mutually agreed upon third parties. They get to keep whatever they made from renting the vacation house. which is my big concession, unless there are tax consequences, in which case they will be responsible for them. We also release each other from all other liabilities up to the present. There's more to it than that, but those are the key points. My wife and I will sign the agreement later today. After that, I won't be able to discuss most of this, but I can talk around it. I think this will be my final update regarding all this nonsense, but I'll respond to comments if I can. As I've said before, sharing this and reading everyone's thoughts and responses has been incredibly helpful and has probably been key to handling this in a relatively healthy way, so thank you all again. Relevant comments. I struggled with not being vindictive, but right now, I'm glad I wasn't. If they cause more drama down the road, I might regret it, but if they follow the agreement, it shouldn't be an issue. The family dynamics are pretty messed up, as you've pointed out. I've only told my parents that we're trying to work things out, nothing more. They may or may not be okay with how things will be moving forward, but I had to do what was best for my wife and me. I'm guessing my sisters have given them a very slanted version of events, which is just another problem we'll have to navigate. The agreement is more of a formalization of how things have been for the past few months. I know it's not what my parents wanted, but I'm fairly content with it. As for whether my sisters have ever shown this level of entitlement before, not really. Not toward me anyway. We used to be okay, never very close, but not enemies. Looking back, they started to resent me when I bought a loft at 25. At that time, neither of them owned a home, but both had met their future husbands. They definitely didn't like that I got a place before they did. It got worse when I met my wife. They didn't like that she came from a wealthy family, especially since I was doing pretty well by then myself. They accused me of being elitist and such. When we got married, I moved into my wife's condo, which was close to where she was doing her fellowship, and I sold the loft. Our wedding was fancy but reasonable, yet my sisters were clearly envious. After that, they and their husbands got pretty petty, and we started minimizing our involvement with them. The profit from selling the loft, being frugal, and not having a house payment enabled me to buy the vacation home for my parents. My folks were okay with keeping the fact that I owned it instead of them a secret because they knew my sisters would be upset and accuse me of using my wife's money, which I didn't. Most of our finances are separate, though it definitely helped that I didn't have a house payment. Up until this recent drama, I thought we were generally okay. Our daily lives are very different, and I can't say I enjoy being around them for more than half a day, but I didn't think they hated me. I did know that both sisters had become pretty spoiled and entitled, but it wasn't my concern, and I didn't have any real conflicts with my brothers-in-law either, just almost nothing in common with them. God, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I didn't realize they were all like this. One last thought. My small fantasy at this point is that I never hear from them again.